You can listen to The Professional Left wherever you get your podcasts, on Netroots Radio, or at our website, proleftpod.com, where you can also contribute to this podcast. There is a PayPal button at our website, or you can mail us a letter and or contribution at P.O. Box 9133, Springfield, Illinois, 62791.
This is the podcast for August 13th, 2024. It's not safe for work.
Recorded live from the Cornfield Resistance, where we're remembering the 17th anniversary of another big-time Democratic convention in Chicago.
Senator, as the president, you're likely to face a lot of nasty Republicans on many of your issues, many of which will use any trick in the book to stop you or to make you look bad. Do you have a sort of Lyndon Johnson side to your persona where you can arm things done despite your, of course, sunny populism?
Well, first of all, welcome to Chicago.
It's The Professional Left with Driftglass and Blue Gal. Hey, Blue Gal.
So when was that, Driftglass?
That was 2007, Blue Gal. 2007. You and I were not on the regular at that point.
No, we had not met face to face yet.
No, but I was familiar with the works of Blue Gal and admired your writing, and I dropped in on a salon every now and then.
You and I knew each other through the internet at that point.
Through the internet.
That's right.
The internet has given me everything I've ever wanted, Blue Gal. I won't tolerate people talking smack about that. And that was the year that Yearly Coast turned into Netroots Nation and came to Chicago. And I know I've said this before. It was a really big deal. It was a really big deal. All but one, as I recall, of the major candidates for president were there. All of them were there. All of them shook hands with the bloggers. All of them had breakout sessions. It was amazing. There was something like, as I recall, 250 credentialed members of the media from all over the planet there. I was there. Yes, Blue Gal. It was my city. I had to go.
Yeah.
There was
Didn't you get a box of Driftglass from certain people? Yeah.
There was a small group of friends from the Steve Gilliard days who we had a little aside. They didn't know who I was. I didn't know who they were. And I recall typing on my laptop FTFY in bold letters and holding it up and waiting for them. And we spotted each other. And it was love at first sight, except we all loved each other, and we still stay in touch. Pretty much, I still know those people.
For those of you who don't know what FTFY is,
yeah,
it's fuck the fucking Yankees.
Fuck the fucking Yankees.
Which was Steve Gilliard's
motto.
Hatred for the New York Yankees.
Yeah, it knew no bounds. It knew no bounds whatsoever. And it was delightful that we would all meet each other in person. I mean, goodness gracious, it was in person. I saw Marcos Melitsas breeze past and said, I'm Driftglass. And he said, who the fuck are you? And he shoved me out of the way into a bunch of beer cans, and it hurt badly. I believe Digby was there, or if she wasn't there, I think she was, but they were flashing like famous slogans up on the screen that we would all know. And what Digby said was one of them.
What Digby said. Yeah.
And this was a community. It was an actual genuine community. And I was there. And it was 17 years ago, and the Republican Party, see if this all sounds familiar. The Republican Party was a smoking train wreck. It was an absolute disaster of a party. It had fucked up the Iraq War. It had, it was plunging
fucked up the economy.
Yeah, it fucked up the economy. It was just, everything was bad. Everything was going really, really bad, really, really fast. And we had torture. We had Hurricane Katrina. I mean, it was a disaster. The Republican Party was a disaster. And most importantly, especially for today's discussion, the media, the mainstream media, the political media was broken, badly broken. And we'd all been writing about this since the dawn of the blogging era. And we really did believe that a group of bloggers could break the mainstream media monopoly and change the way we did politics. And for about a minute, we did.
Yeah.
And it was a success. It was great. The reason all the presidential candidates were there is they recognized that there was a new force to be reckoned with. And, when Marcos Melitsas shows up on Meet the Press, only to be smothered, as I recall, by Harold Ford Jr. and never seen again. But it really was kind of a high watermark for the blogger movement. And we really did believe.
Done Meet the Press.
Yeah.
So,
exactly.
right?
Exactly. But we really did think that we were going to upend the current system, not make a revolution in terms of, proletariats lobbing Molotov cocktails in the streets, but really upend the mainstream media monopoly and get our word out. That was always our big beef. That no one was listening to what we were saying. What we were saying was right. So,
well, and I think one of the things we're talking about today is how impermanent things actually are.
yeah.
That, you think some things are going to last forever and they don't. And I would say that, yes, at that moment, that was a high water mark for Daily Kos and the blogosphere, so to speak.
Mhm.
But the Women's March was also another high moment. And all of these, we talk so much about how it's the same Republican Party, from 1973. The 1973 Republican Party is just as racist as today's Republican Party.
Mhm.
And, starting history at 2015, 2016 is nonsense when it comes to the Republican Party. But I think it's important to celebrate and understand that the anti-war movement and the women's movement and the civil rights movement of the 1960s continues on today.
It
And
does.
we use different tools and we use different strategy and so forth. But it is a lot of the same values that carry us forward. And that's not something we need to diminish in our thinking.
No.
We should celebrate that.
Mhm.
So I appreciate that as a blogger, and you and I are bloggers, that we sort of treasure that moment at 2007.
Mhm.
But we also carry on. And, what we're doing now may be very different in 10 years, but the cause remains.
Well,
So-
I must disagree with you, Blue Gal. Everyone knows that music ended at Woodstock. That's it.
That's
if you
right.
weren't
There
at
was no more-
Woodstock,
There was no more music after
nope.
that.
If you weren't at Woodstock, you just forget it. You just
Yeah.
know you're dead to me. No. Yes, things do change and they do move on.
They
But
do.
you're right. You're right.
Yeah.
The values and things that we consider virtuous, the tools change and the values don't. Yeah, absolutely right.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. So, and I want to thank everyone who has reached out to us, inviting us to meet up with them in Chicago next week. But we're not going to be there.
No.
We've got young people coming home for back to school shopping because that's what they want to do before
Mhm.
school starts. And it's just turning out to be not possible for us. And of course, hotel rates during a Democratic National Convention go up quite a bit, and availability. So it just seemed the better part of valor for us to stay home here in Springfield. I want to say also, I was in Washington, D.C. for Bill Clinton's first inaugural.
Yeah.
And my friend from high school who lived in the D.C. area at the time had me come down from Boston and stay at his place. We went to the parade, and all of the seating was for, elected people, Democrats. It was all reserved. There was nowhere for anyone to sit along the parade route. So we went back to his place and watched it on TV. And I think a lot of people will be watching the convention in Chicago from their hotel rooms because it's easier and you're able to get in. It's getting into that hall is going to be, unless you're a delegate or a credentialed person, and they're out of credentials now, you're not going to get in.
Well, and one more thing that, I mean, I've heard a lot of bullshit, a lot of nonsense about 1968 and Chicago Convention. And the 1996 Democratic Convention was in Chicago.
Right.
And I was there for that. And mostly I remember it was a lot of traffic problems,
Right.
a lot of,
No, that's
had
the
to get-
point.
I got to get to work. Okay. And a bunch of weirdos from out of town are taking all the parking and they're making
Well, but
nuisances of themselves.
J.B. Pritzker is doing a real good job
Oh,
up there.
It's going to go great. It's
Yeah.
a beautiful city.
Forget-
It's
Chicago has a black mayor.
yeah,
It's
black
a
mayor.
different city
Yeah.
than it was in 1968 and 1996. So
Well, that's the thing about permanence that we were saying.
Yeah.
Some things change. We don't have a daily anymore in Chicago
no,
running
No.
the city, and we
Right.
have a billionaire Democratic governor in Illinois. So things do
but
change.
listen, all of us Democrats, Chicago is going to celebrate the nomination of another smart, energetic person, a mixed race woman to run for president.
Mm-hmm.
Once again, we are facing a Republican Party that is a disaster and a political media that is broken beyond repair. That is all in some ways the same. History rhymes, right? It doesn't repeat, it rhymes. So let's talk about that, Driftglass. What succeeded, what failed, and what we have learned.
Well, we have learned that in 2004, the Republican Party was riding high.
Yeah.
In 2008, all the chickens that we warned about had come home to roost. And in 2008, the Republican Party was demoralized and ashamed. I mean, they were backing John McCain. They were humping Sarah Palin's leg, but there was still this deep sense of, we really fucked this up, and we have to go to the polls and we have to vote for McCain because that's what you got to do. But just this snarling, angry, we don't want to be held responsible for this shit, and we're not going to be. We're going to put on funny hats. We're going to call ourselves a Tea Party. We're going to skate.
And there was plenty of money to help them do that. When Beck got paid $1 million to promote it, Fox News promoted the Tea Party. They had money behind that. Rebranding was a well-funded machine. Yeah.
Oh, it was coast to coast. It was, as we noted, Dick Armey ran the thing.
Yeah.
There was a ton of money behind it, and the purpose was get the Republican Party out from under the burden of being the Republican Party for the last 8 years.
Right.
And bulldoze the entire Bush administration with the able assistance of the mainstream media, because they didn't want to remember how they rolled over for the Bush administration. They had a lot to gain for pretending the past never happened. And what Republicans learned was that being ashamed of fucking up and admitting your mistakes or running from your mistakes or whatever never works.
Nope.
What you need to do is double down on everything. What you need to do
Roger
is be
Stone. That is the Roger Stone handbook. Yep.
Double down on everything, yell louder, scream louder, scream the Democrats are communist baby killers louder, and then we'll win. So they learned to not have a conscience and not have any shame and not take responsibility for anything, while the party leadership kept pretending this was a normal Republican Party. We also learned that Obama clip was much longer, shall we say. And I believe I was in that breakout session. So if you get the video, you might see me in the audience going, I'm Driftglass and I'm from Chicago and I know that guy. But one of the things was Obama bragging that, when they do something scurrilous, we need to do something above the fray. We don't respond to scurrilous attacks with scurrilous attacks. The truth, the lies, the big lie being the big lie requires repetition. The truth requires repetition too. And this basic sense that we have right on our side. We're right. And we don't need to worry about these scurrilous attacks and all this bullshit they're throwing around and nonsense. We shouldn't stoop to their level. We shouldn't trade insult for insult. We should just rise above it all. That doesn't work. We learned the hard way that kind of purity idealism going into the White House, Barack Obama was ready to deal with Republicans from Springfield.
Right.
The cigar-filled room, and drink a little scotch, play poker, and cut deals. He was not prepared for the Republican Party as it exists today, and it's only gotten worse. So we've learned that the way you deal with the Republican Party is curb stomp them till they can't stand up, metaphorically. You do not let them up.
With joy and humor, if I may add.
But you never let up, you never give an inch, and you never give them anything. Never accept their frame on any question, never accept the predicate of their attacks, go after them all the time, every day, and never stop. And that's the thing that Obama had to have basically pounded into his head by his second term, which was, every time and this is the lesson that the media learned, which was, wow, we can really roll this guy. We can get everything we want. We can burn the place down and blame it on him for not preventing the fire from starting in the first place. We can go 8 years demanding, why won't Obama lead? And that's a really hard lesson for us to learn over here on the left. That being in the right and having the right policies is just not enough. And having a media that's complicit in the right-wing attacks on our democracy is something we have to sort of have as a separate conversation. It's not enough to understand the Republican Party is a shit pile of bigots and imbeciles. It is equally important to understand that the media is in on it.
Right.
They are part of the problem, and they need to be taken apart brick by brick with as much vigor as we take apart the Republican Party to the best of our abilities.
If I can add, one thing that actually did work for Obama was humor.
Yeah.
And the times that he was able to, particularly at the Correspondents' Dinner, White House Correspondents' Dinner, just make fun of them.
Mhm.
And I know that making fun of Trump had long-term consequences for the nation.
Yeah.
But it did work. That worked for him. And it's working for us this year.
It sure is.
Making fun of Republicans and calling them weird is working. Because they are weird. It is because it's true.
Yeah.
It's funny because it's true meme.
And the devil cannot abide laughter.
No, cannot abide laughter. And we nominated a genuinely funny vice presidential candidate with his dad jokes and his Midwest aw shucks persona.
Yeah.
And Tim Walz is a FUD, by the way, Driftglass. I learned this word this week. FUD is from Elmer Fudd. And it is the casual hunter who hunts pheasant, wabbits, and ducks, right?
Sure.
As a weekend hobby, not having AR-15s in their basement. Treating their firearms responsibly, locking them up when they're not in use, wearing the right equipment. And may I say that camouflage Harris Walls hat with the orange embroidery on it is apparently just selling like hotcakes. Multiple different constituencies like that hat. Apparently there's some rapper or something that wears camo. I'm not familiar with any of this. I'm sure that youngest child and middle child, if they're listening, would roll their eyes and go, "Oh, Mom, you don't even know."
Oh, so out
But
of
I
it.
don't. But apparently it is not just, blue dots in red states who are FUDs.
Right.
And by the way, I told you during our rehearsal, most of the deer hunters in Pennsylvania are actually FUDs.
Yeah.
And you said Illinois too, right?
Yeah, absolutely. No, 6 blocks from here, 4 blocks from here. Springfield, this area is set up kind of weird. There are all these little, there's these little carve out towns around here that are white flight towns that are encompassed entirely by Springfield, but they're their own thing because they didn't want to have integration. This was, in the 50s and 60s.
Yeah.
But there's also little tracts around here that are unincorporated. They're not part of anything except the county.
Because they wanted to burn their trash in the 70s also. That was the thing. Yeah.
It's this weird overlapping jurisdiction thing. But, 5 blocks from here, you can have your deer dressed professionally if you want.
Yeah.
You can go past
They
there
have a sign out in front of their house for deer
meat.
dressing.
And you can see a deer carcass, getting ready for getting prepped in somebody's, in their garage as you drive by.
Yeah.
It is not a shocking thing
in
around
unincorporated Springfield.
No.
That's right.
And some of I have dear friends and colleagues who are very good liberals who are also very strong proponents of 4-H and very avid hunters. And they don't hunt because they like murdering animals. They hunt for the sport of it, and they eat what they kill. And
there are some people who shoot foxes on their farms because they like their chickens.
Yeah.
So it's really a question of, I have a shotgun because my livestock is threatened by a wolf or a fox or a whatever. And
my late and very right-wing uncle, who I don't think he'd be voting for Trump, but I'm not sure. He sure loved Reagan, though. He thought Reagan wasn't quite conservative enough. But he was a FUD too. But he walked the talk. He had his own gun room. It didn't have a million guns. It had a couple of rifles, a shotgun, and a pistol or two. He pressed his own ammo. He went on pack rides with his friends who were like cardiac surgeons because he was rich and they were all rich. But he hunted ducks. And when we go out west and visit his ranch, we'd ride the horses and shoot the guns. He taught us gun safety, and he would have to hunt varmints on his ranch because it was 80 acres, and there were, he doesn't have plastic explosives like they have in Caddyshack. He used, shotguns. And he had his dog Terry, and he and his dog Terry would go duck hunting, and he'd come home and his wife would prep the duck and they'd eat it for dinner. Yeah. That's not the kind of person we're talking about when we're talking about responsible gun legislation. We're talking about the people who think you have to walk into a fucking 7-Eleven strapped to the hilt with AR-15s and a gun in each pocket and dare anyone with your big dumb t-shirt to come up and make trouble.
Yeah.
Those
Yeah.
are the people that are not FUDs.
They're
They're
not
assholes.
FUDs.
Yeah.
Right.
Anyway.
Yeah. Talk to me about Lawrence O'Donnell this week.
Yeah.
Your class.
You all, I'm sure everyone listening to this probably remembers Lawrence O'Donnell taking the media to task last week. We saw it via the internet, since we are currently not watching MSNBC, but we heard about it, and it was a big deal. I might have seen a bit of it and might have brought it to your attention, and let's watch this. And it went off everywhere. It was by, let's say, 2007 yearly Coase standards, pretty basic stuff, stuff we've all been writing about and know about for years. But for what you're likely to see on television standards, it was astonishing. It was like, volcano in Iowa. It was completely unexpected and wild. But then Lawrence O'Donnell follows up with this, and this is from social media, quote, "Literally the last thing I want to do is criticize the news media. I could do it every night for an hour. So when I do it, please understand you're hearing 1% of my complaints. Follow Professor Jay Rosen, friend of the pod, for consistent, wise media criticism," unquote. Okay. There's a lot going on in those 2 or 3 sentences.
Yep.
I would say, without reservation, we are in the middle of an epidemic of media failure across the board. Newspapers, magazines, television, cable news, radio, media everywhere is just an epidemic of failure. Now, can you imagine during like peak COVID, Dr. Fauci coming out and saying, sure, I could talk about the dangers of COVID every night, and what you've just heard from me is just 1% of the shit I know. But really, that's the last thing in the world I want to talk about. So instead, let's hear some banjo music instead. That is disturbing to me, because what it tells me is if that's 1% of what you know, 99% of what you know is going on behind closed doors. It's worse than any of us thought.
There's no transparency.
And you have some sort of really vested interest / threat to your career with a gun to your head, telling you cannot talk about this shit on the one media where you should be talking about it.
Yeah. I mean, it's not the same life or death as COVID and Anthony Fauci, but it's pretty damn important to our democracy to understand what the pressures are regarding telling the truth. And I don't say the words deeply disturbed because I think that's melodramatic, but this week I am deeply disturbed that the media is not releasing the hack when they clearly chose to follow WikiLeaks to the depths of the ocean in 2016. And that's a decision in favor of Trump. And I don't understand it, except I do. I understand that this is a this is a business. It's a money-making business. And somehow exposing what is going on behind the scenes in the Trump campaign is that decision to not do that is being made at a very high level.
Well, and remember that, I'm sure we all remember that the Hillary emails were all nothing burgers. There was nothing there.
Yeah, my colleague Carolee Coons read every single one of them. I think she was the only person in media who actually read every single email that was published by WikiLeaks. And what she found was a genuinely kind person who followed up with people over and over again on issues, on whether they had any needs after someone in their family passed away, a kind friend, and a competent manager of her career, and understanding that her career was to find issues that mattered to people, find solutions to those issues, and follow up with people who could actually do something.
Yeah, I know you're going to,
or that she could do something for them.
I know you're going to die mad over her autism proposals.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I anytime we talk about this, I start crying because she met in New Hampshire. She met with scores of parents, elderly parents of adults with autism who had nowhere to go because their children had aged out of, being able to be in school until they were 21, 22. And, special needs kids who cannot function outside of high or who benefit from the services provided by high school can stay in high school until they're 21, 22, depending on the state and the school district. But when they age out of that, there aren't enough group homes. There aren't enough. And then there's those of us who have a child who is, and they used to use the term high functioning. They don't say that anymore, but who is capable of independent living.
Right.
And often have, as you and I know, obsessive interests and tremendous skills in one area, whether it's computer programming or geography or, whatever it is. They have encyclopedic minds and will learn everything about a subject and be incredibly reliable because they live on a timeline. And so showing up for work on time is just, it wouldn't occur to them not to show up for work on time. I'm supposed to be here at 8:00. I remember, maybe I've told this story before, getting a call from Junior Dude's school, and he was not at the assembly when he was supposed to be at the assembly. He had signed out. And I said to them, his diagnosis doesn't allow him to not be at the assembly.
Check again.
Double check that and ask him to look at where he signed out. And sure enough, some other kid had signed out with his name, knowing Junior Dude wouldn't get in trouble. And so I'll use that name.
Yeah.
And put that name on the sheet instead of my name, and then I haven't left. And I can go have a smoke or do whatever. When they see Junior Dude's name on the sheet, no one will question it. Anyway, but yes, Hillary Clinton, autism, knew that there was an opportunity to tap into a reservoir of talent.
Right.
That would benefit our country and our economy.
Yes.
And yes, there are private companies that have also figured this out, particularly with
tech.
Tech. Yeah.
Absolutely. Half the people I worked with in my tech career had either autism, I swear, or Aspie's. I mean, I'm Aspie myself, and
we both are.
That's how I was the bridge between the ones who were severely antisocial but geniuses.
Yeah.
And management who didn't understand anything, thought it was all dark magic.
They called me the travel agent between the translator between talking to tech people who did not want to talk to you except about their obsessive interests, and the managers who really needed them to do a certain amount of work.
Yes. Yeah. I am a child of both worlds, Blue Cow. But back to the emails. It's the content of the emails was benign.
Right.
It was the existence of them. It was the screaming headlines the New York Times ran constantly.
And the fact that no one else was going to take the time to read them, just like the Mueller report. No one's going to take the time to read 300 pages of that. Yeah. And we're having that. That's what I really like, though, about Project 2025, is progressives are reading it.
Sure.
And pulling stuff out like, they don't want to regulate baby formula anymore.
Right. What? That can't be right. Oh, page 322 right there.
Right.
In black and white. That's what it says.
Yeah.
Yeah. But the email issue was, how can we take this innocuous thing that was maybe a mistake, but not malevolent, and turn it into something to beat the crap out of Hillary Clinton with every day in the New York Times? The exact opposite is happening in exactly the same circumstances with Donald Trump, which is we have hundreds of emails and texts and videos and all sorts of shit. And we're not going to tell you anything.
We're not going to remember anything of stuff we aired or stuff that was on Twitter, stuff he said.
Right.
Stuff he said yesterday with Elon Musk. We're just going to move on to the next thing because that's just a misstatement.
Well, and as you mentioned when we were talking earlier, one of these components is going to die out sooner or later.
Well, and this is the thing that you and I have been having a conversation about, which is things that are gone that we never thought would be gone.
Right.
In our life. Times are changing over and over and over. Shopping malls. We thought you'd always go to have a shopping mall to go to.
A mall somewhere.
Strip mall somewhere, right? Landlines. Newspapers.
Yeah.
Local newspapers would have Lots and lots of coverage and lots of reporters.
Mm-hmm.
But here's the deal. Cable television is dying, Driftglass.
Yeah.
You know that.
It absolutely is.
Cable news is dying. The one that I brought up with you was when I was a child, my parents had all of the books by John Updike. Rabbit Run, Rabbit is Rich, those were classics, instant classics. And we were going to be reading John Updike well into the 21st century.
Sure.
When you're 90 years old, you'll be reading John Updike to your kids, Fran. That's what'll happen. It's like no one reads John Updike anymore. And he was a fine writer for the time. He encapsulated post-war white male America. And the need to tell that story has diminished in the way that he did it.
Yeah.
And so here, looking at this with cable news dying, our role in providing context for what is going on, that may change in 10 years. There might be something better than podcasting that we don't know about.
Going door to door and telling people what we think.
Bang, 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 David Brooks. Oh, no, the David Brooks guy is here again.
No, make him go away. Slip
We're
$5
not home.
Slip $5 through the mail slot, honey, and make him go away.
We thought blogging was the peak of our influence.
Yeah, and it was for a while.
I mean, and it was for a hot minute, but
Yep.
There's other opportunities. And so I just want to be open to whatever it's going to be. And we're here. We're going to stay here and do this. And I love doing this. And I know our audience loves doing this. And whether we're talking about our grandkids or talking about the media revolution, we'll figure it out. But, things change.
You know what we learned a couple of weeks ago is that there will always be an audience and there will always be a stage and there will always be performers who will put on Macbeth.
Right.
Hundreds of years later, that's still, there will always be people who want to know what's going on, or more accurately, want to understand what's going on. Why are things this way? What the hell is going on here? This seems to make no sense to me. And there'll be people who can explain that. Now, sometimes the explanation is, give me all your money and pray to my God, and I'll let you in on the secret. After you die, everything's going to be awesome.
Let me ask you a question, though, Driftglass.
Sure.
You and I saw Macbeth at the Illinois Shakespeare Festival, and then the next day we watched The Tragedy of Macbeth with Denzel Washington and Frances McDormand, right?
We did, which is awesome.
I've watched it 4 times. I could watch it once a month.
Let's go watch it now.
One of the Coen brothers made it. Joel Coen made it. Great, one of the greatest movies. One of my top 10 favorite movies of all time, for sure. Okay, but what do you think would have surprised William Shakespeare more? Macbeth being played by one of the leading black actors of our time, or Lady Macbeth being played by an actual woman?
The second one.
Yeah, I think so too.
The second one, absolutely.
Yeah.
No.
Yeah.
I mean,
and finding
Iago,
out that Frances McDormand has a tremendously celebrated career as a talented actress and has influence in Hollywood, has made a speech asking all of the women in the audience who had any nominations to stand up, and all of the women that stood up at the Oscars. And she said, don't talk to us tonight at the parties. Talk to us in your office or our office in 2 days. And, inclusion rider. We're going to have an inclusion rider in our contracts. So be ready for that. And advocated for women's place in Hollywood. That would shock Shakespeare. Yeah.
well,
I think so.
and generally, the idea of actors being treated well would shock him. Making money.
Yeah.
Not
Well, that
being
would have
treated,
shocked Alfred Hitchcock too.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the acting profession being treated as a profession that was worthy of respect, as opposed to one step up from prostitute.
Yeah. Oh, and by the way, Shakespeare, there's this thing called Apple TV. Let me push a couple buttons here and you can watch your play.
Yeah.
Like, what?
Yeah. Oh, and the guy who played your play last time did 4 other movies and he made $50 million last year.
Yeah.
Just FYI, he's got his own island. So, these things happen. But the basic human thing of needing to understand the world and having storytellers tell you what the world is like never changes. We're just wired that way.
Yep.
And so the
Yep.
need for context and frankly the draw of grifters who will sell
Yeah.
lies to you, who will feed you bullshit to get your money and
To
vote,
make you feel good about being white and
Well,
uneducated,
to
yeah,
scam you. I mean,
and to
you're,
scam
you're-
you for
you're
money.
hungry.
Yes.
You're hungry for answers.
Mhm.
They will provide. The right wing evangelicals will provide you a vision of hell where all the liberals are burning forever,
Mhm.
and that's what you
Mhm.
want. So send them money.
Yep.
So
Yep.
there'll always be a competition among storytellers to tell you some version of the truth and some version of some comforting fairy tale that you wish to believe.
Yeah,
Now-
and you are really the one who's being persecuted.
You are. You're
You
the
know,
sufferer.
The
here.
discrimination is against white people. Yeah.
Oh my God. You're so right.
Look, we're going to take a little break from all of this for a minute. Now, I want to talk about a hopeful article that I read today in a website called Works in Progress. I'm very interested in how planners and people in power work on things like housing. And this article was about Arlington, Virginia. And Arlington, Virginia, this website called Works in Progress was writing about a bullseye plan, which is where planners engaged residents and developed this bullseye plan for permitting dense development around 5 public transit stations. And they're all in a row, where the trains run.
Mhm.
And a quarter mile of land surrounding that station in a circle was permitted to build buildings over 20 stories.
Mhm.
Just a quarter mile, half a mile in diameter around these stations. And so there's this circle around this station. Then a little way down the train, there's another circle around the train station, or another circle, and there's 5 of them. And these quarter mile of land closest to the stations was intended for the most density. Now, if you're a quarter mile from a train station that's going to take you into DC,
Right.
you don't need a car, and you can live in an apartment. And this article says, today, several buildings stretching over 20 stories stand within these very narrow radiuses. Or radii. It should have been radii, but yes, radiuses. The exact density permitted in the county's transit corridors isn't spelled out in its zoning ordinance because projects may purchase transferable development rights from nearby property owners or earn bonus density for providing income-restricted housing. So you can build more housing if you make it affordable housing.
Mm-hmm.
And you talked to me about this, about Cabrini Green and Robert Taylor Homes.
Yeah, especially
and how
Robert Taylor. Especially
they were-
Robert Taylor Homes.
Completely isolated from any services, from
Oh, yeah.
downtown, from transit, on the other side of a highway in
Yeah,
Chicago.
that was the point. The point was
Yeah.
to keep them penned in, keep the black population who lived there, who
Mhm.
had their neighborhoods bulldozed to make room for highways,
Right.
hemmed in
Mhm.
on one side by a highway, by
Mhm.
like 9 lanes of highway, which they couldn't possibly cross,
Mhm.
and
Mhm.
feel like they're in prison. They could see downtown from where they live, but they never went there because
Yeah.
it was far away and unreachable in a lot of ways.
And so you're so completely isolated that, the business that you turn to is drugs or
Yeah.
violence or
Yeah.
whatever. And I think about this, that if you can build these apartment buildings within near transit, what happens when you build an apartment building near transit? All of a sudden, there's a laundromat, there's a bar, there's a restaurant, there's a coffee shop,
Mhm.
and there are stores, right?
Well, and these things are built for working people
Right,
who will be commuting to the city.
right. And they might want coffee to take on the train.
Right.
Or
affordable,
they might want to
affordable
drop
housing.
off their suit to be cleaned after work.
Well, the place where my parents moved after we moved back from the Philippines was this concept, but it was the sprawling yards and curvilinear streets of Park Forest,
Yeah,
built
Yeah.
for the white man who's going to go to the city every day and his wife who's going to be at home baking and taking care of the kids.
mm-hmm.
And so the elements don't change. The elements of I need a place where my family can be raised in safety around some neighbors who I get to know and are friendly with, that is within striking distance of a job that I can pay for it all.
Right.
And that is such a wonderful plan that you found about these Arlington developments.
Yeah, and these ideas can be replicated other places. And AOC did a video this week about an apartment complex in Brooklyn, I believe it was, where it's an apartment complex, a playground, a street, and then right across the street from the playground is a drop. And at the drop, in the bottom of the drop, is a massive highway where 18-wheelers are going 24/7 because it's New York City. 24/7, you've got 18-wheelers going 60 miles an hour, literally across the street from a playground. And she pointed to that building and she said, a large number of children living in that building have asthma.
Uh-huh.
And it's because of this. They're playing in this playground and they're breathing in the spew from these trucks. Mm-hmm. And what she wants is to build an overpass, a green space overpass over this highway, mm-hmm. so that the smog and filth can be redirected away from the children and hopefully collected in some way, but also so that the children will have green space across from their playground rather mm-hmm. than trucks. And she said, is this overpass going to cost a lot of money? Yeah. Asthma costs a lot of money too. Mm-hmm. And this is about human beings living a better life.
Absolutely.
So these plans and these housing and making incremental improvements to people's lives is what brings hope, and what hope brings joy, and joy brings a better life for all of us. And that's the Drift Class. Did I just do democratic messaging?
You did really well too. I might add, Blue Gal.
Uh-oh. And then the other trend I saw this week, and I think it must have been some sort of AP story that local people then plugged in a man on the street interview from someone in their community, because I saw an article from California, I saw an article from Oregon, I saw an article from Texas, and they all had the basic same theme, which is here is a couple that is making six figures and can't afford a mortgage. Mm-hmm. And the thought is people are told that 1/3 of their income, 30% or so, should go to the mortgage. And 30% of these people's income, even though in the case of the Oregon couple, that was the specific one I read, the wife, I think, was a operating room nurse, so she was making six figures. And her husband was also a professional making six figures. They made over $300,000 as a couple, which is way more than we make. Mm-hmm. They couldn't afford to buy a house. There was no housing that would allow them a mortgage that was 1/3 of their income. And so, but I saw this article in several places and I thought, oh, this is something interesting. And this reminded me of something that Chris Hayes said many years ago. And I know we've talked about it before, which is the French Revolution wasn't started by peasants. It wasn't started by the lowest income or the low class. Uh-huh. It was started by upper middle class people who thought that, and were thought correctly, that the extreme elite wealthy were taking their birthright.
Yes, absolutely. Yep.
And the upper middle class people had the media attention and the electoral skills and the privilege that allowed them to make changes. Mm-hmm. And I think that's what we're seeing with the Kamala Harris campaign, is a recognition that things have to change.
Yes.
And John Oliver noting that, most of Hawaii is owned by 36 billionaires.
Mm-hmm. Who are wrecking it. And the Army is wrecking it. Putting
that Army guy had a speech, didn't he?
Oh God, yeah, he did. Yeah, we're
not going out and unburying all the mines we laid for safety.
Yeah, all the unexploded stuff, for safety.
But Native Hawaiians have been given land grants, and the land grants have live mines on them. Mm-hmm. And they're waiting 19 years to get their birthright as a Hawaiian, as a Native Hawaiian. And I have to brag, middle child and youngest child were all over this. I was fantasizing with them about a trip we could take after they're both graduated from college. The three of us could go on some fantasy trip. What about Hawaii? Oh no, Mom. We would never trample on Native Hawaiian land. Okay.
Okay, then. Okay.
So they were way ahead of John Oliver on that one. But as you noted, after we watched that episode,
Hmm.
John Oliver's staff is made up of middle child and youngest child.
Yeah, and
So-
he does a lot of stuff that apparently only Comedy Central can do.
Yeah.
He
You mean
will say
HBO? You mean HBO?
HBO with HBO money and Comedy Central can do. One of the things is constantly mentioning how ironic it is that a British person is bringing the story to you of
That's
colonial
right.
exploitation.
Yeah. Yeah.
But the other thing he notes, which we're actually going to get to in just a second, is how much corporate daddy hates him.
Yeah.
How much he pisses off, his show pisses off, and the stuff they cover pisses off the corporation that owns the network.
Yeah.
And that advertises. And they don't care.
And it's only his success that keeps it going.
Yeah.
Right.
And Jon Stewart did the same thing.
Yeah.
In his day.
In
the
his
same
day.
thing.
Yeah.
Make a point of the fact that, you know what? The people we're talking about are the people who own this network or advertise with us. I did want to mention, sort of end to that, something I've talked about before, which is a story by a guy named Jerry Pournelle. Jerry Pournelle is a science fiction writer. He wrote a whole bunch of cool stuff. He was wrote a lot of novels with his friend Larry Niven.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And half of you are going to give me a long list of reading that I haven't done yet with Niven and Pournelle, and their series about global or galactic empire or solar empire. Got it. I understand this. I'm doing this on the fly. My reading list is not in front of me. But Inferno is about science fiction writer goes to hell and doesn't believe that hell is possible. Therefore, he keeps finding scientific explanations or theoretical possibilities for everything he sees around him. But he's got a guide through hell, as one does in the original Divine Comedy. And he finds out at the end that his guide is Mussolini. So that's a kick in the ass. But he's constantly bitching to his guide about how unfair this all is. And why is, I knew that guy in life. He wasn't so bad. How come he's burning a lake of fire? And this guy, it's ridiculous. It's overkill. Why is he being drowned? Why is he being, diced into pieces? And his guide is like very calm, sort of like explains how things work. And finally our protagonist loses his temper and just starts berating him, as I recall. And his guide finally turns to him and says, "Look, I'm in hell too.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I'm here as well. This isn't a party for me." And he says it more eloquent than that, but I too am in hell. So when we talk about the media, and we do, and we talk about among our friends on social media and the people who write us, the people who listen, and people who are higher up the food chain than us, who are just like beating their head against the wall, and there's, and all the same names that I do on social media who are just, what the fuck is wrong with the New York Times? What the hell is wrong over there?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Here's the thing. You and I don't have media access, but Chris Hayes does.
Mm-hmm.
And Norm Ornstein does, and Stuart Stevens does, and Tim Miller, and Bill Kristol, and James Fallows, and Mark Jacobs, and Bruce Bartlett to a certain degree. Lawrence O'Donnell certainly does. Keith Olbermann does. He's the only one who tells tales out of school practically. Rachel Maddow does. David Frum does. And all these people have in common is they have vastly greater access to the executives and power brokers inside the Beltway media who are making these horribly destructive decisions than you and I do.
Mm-hmm.
Because we have none. I might be able to get the former editor of the local paper to talk to me for 10 minutes about how local media works.
At the grocery store. If you bump into her at the grocery store, she's not going to return your phone call.
No. And she's a very nice lady. And when she worked for the local Republican rag, you could tell she was in great discomfort the entire time because she had to work against her own principles to work for that shit place.
Mm-hmm.
But we have no access. We've been firing our pea shooters at the Dark Tower of the Beltway media for like 20 years now. Yeah. And everything's gotten worse. And yet the people with real clout have proved they can actually make noise when it happens, when it counts. Witness the fate of Ronna Romney McDaniel.
Yeah.
Who was hired and fired in like 2 minutes because a whole bunch of people with actual clout at MSNBC and NBC stood up on their hind legs and said, "Oh, fuck no, we're not doing this." And then things changed. But here's the thing. There's Peter Baker. And there's Susan Glasser, and there's Maggie Haberman and Chris Cillizza and Ross Douthat and Brett Stevens and Kristen Welker and Andrea Mitchell and Katie Tur and on and on and on. All these really awful people with jobs for life in the media. And everyone is quiet about them. No one says a word. Do you remember on when we used to watch a million years ago, Morning Joe, Blue Gal?
Yeah.
And somebody said something mean about David Brooks.
Yeah.
Remember that?
Yes, I do.
And
Yes,
it was
I
like,
do.
and it was hedged with a lot of, well, you know, he's a great guy, and he's got a foot-long dick, and he's as big as a house, and he's like a superhuman
He's
in every
wrong
way.
in this one area. He's just completely wrong. And you could hear Mika Brzezinski just gasp.
But you know, nobody was wronger about the Iraq War than David Brooks. And you just heard everyone went quiet.
Yep.
And there was this gasp, like, you've slapped the czar. You've touched the holy thing you're not supposed to touch. And there is that attitude towards people in the media by their colleagues who fucking well know better that we cannot talk about them. We cannot call Chris Cillizza a name because he might be working in our network in a minute, or he might be our boss next month. And so my example is, for example, the useless hack Bill Kristol. Bill Kristol, who exists only because he's Irvin Kristol's kid. So he's a Nepo baby, and he got his son-in-law a job in the media, which is second generation Nepo baby. Bill Kristol was invented by Rupert Murdoch.
Yep.
He was given a bunch of money by Rupert Murdoch to run a thing called the Weekly Standard. He was given a charity job at the New York Times and another wing-nut welfare gig at Time Magazine and at Fox and ABC News and at MSNBC. He used to make the rounds of all the Sunday shows, lying his ass off, and nobody ever called him on it. He used to be David Brooks's boss at the Weekly Standard. Now, you cannot tell me that Bill Kristol couldn't make 3 phone calls, and just like that, we would have the inside scoop on why the hell Peter Baker still has a goddamn job.
And the thing is, he wouldn't need to make any phone calls.
No,
he could tell
knows.
you.
He knows.
Yes.
But so there is this thing happening among people, and I despise Bill Kristol, but even people that you might like or admire or have good feelings toward, and I understand that. Why is their loyalty to their job higher than their loyalty to the country? What is it about them?
Because they want to feed their kids and pay their mortgage.
I have a nice Park
why.
Slope condo, and I got 3 kids, and I want them to go to a nice school. And if I say shit out of school, I'll say things on social media, Chris Hayes, like, can you believe what's wrong with the New York Times? Are you telling me you don't know anyone at the New York Times? You have no friends working at the New York Times? You can't call the New York Times and say, just tell me off the record, who the fuck is doing this? And if you say A.G. Schulzberger's doing it, give me some details and I'll do it on the air tomorrow. But I can't do that because then I'd be gone.
Right.
Because none of these people are self-employed.
Right.
Even
exactly.
Mark Halperin. Mark Halperin was given a make-work job by somebody at no labels, like doing accounting or something, to keep his health insurance.
He did not have to keep paying Cobra.
Right.
Right. No,
when he was
did
rousted
not.
off the big-time thing for being a creepy sex pest. And in fact, this week, Blue Gal, this very week, we saw the triumphant return of Mark Halperin as an off-screen character, like a Greek chorus.
Yeah.
On the Morning Joe show.
Well,
Morning
we
Joe
didn't see it because we don't watch Morning Joe.
But we were made aware of it, and video was sent along to us. And
many alert listeners let us know. Did you know they mentioned Mark
Halperin's newsletter? You know, Mark Halperin has a newsletter. You know, Mark Halperin reported this week because they're just desperate to get their creepy sex pest friend back on the air.
Yep.
And that was overshadowed by the triumphant return of Chris Cillizza, who was sacked by CNN and has now showed up on MSNBC as the head of some kind of consulting company.
And he's on K Street Consulting Company. Has given him a senior position. Yeah.
And to wrap up this portion of my tirade, I did some deep research, people. This is what I do for you. This is Rachel Maddow level shit. So let's all have a little respect. Dr. Robert Sobel, who was an associate professor of history at Hofstra University, said that the British created a civil service job in 1803 for a man to stand on the cliffs of Dover with a spyglass. And his job was to ring a bell if he saw Napoleon coming. And that job was abolished in 1945.
Wow.
So generations of people were told, stand on the cliff, look out at the water, ring the bell if Napoleon's coming. Well, sir, Napoleon's dead. Doesn't matter. Doesn't matter. That's the job. The king, the government has created this position. The powers that be have decreed this shall be so. And so even though it's mindless and useless, keep doing it. So
and the
what's
money's
happening
in the budget. Yeah.
So what's happening in the media? Eons ago, the mission was, I believe, fairness. to be fair to people, to tell a story fairly. That is the Walter Cronkite era.
Edward R. Murrow, Walter Cronkite, Fred Friendly.
Be fair.
Yeah.
Be fair.
Yeah.
But that was the mission. That mission became kind of a ritual. The ritual became balance. We must have a balance of both sides of the story. We must have each side needs to be represented fairly in service of fairness. And then somewhere around the Iraq War, or maybe 10 years before that, the ritual became a farce. It became both sides do it. Both sides do it. Everything's at both sides. Everything's to blame for both sides. And bless you all of you, for turning both sides do it into a farce, into a joke that is now a punchline. But here's the thing. They're still doing it.
Mm-hmm.
And they're still doing it for the same reason that poor dumb asshole was standing on the White Cliffs of Dover in 1930 looking out for Napoleon, because nobody has ordered them to stop. This is all they know how to do. This is what has come down from on high. And since we have no will of our own and no judgment of our own, our job is to tell the story the media wants us to tell.
Yep. Two more things before we end.
Okay.
I want to reiterate what Charlie Pierce has said about sports writers. That sports writers realize that these guys don't need to talk to you. The star pitcher of a baseball team doesn't need to talk to you. You need him to talk to you for your job. But he doesn't need to talk. All he needs to do is pitch. And Kamala Harris doesn't need the press.
No.
The press needs Kamala Harris to do their jobs, but she doesn't need them. And this whining when members of the media are on her airplane, it is not as if she has shut down all conversation with members of the media. I've seen two instances in the past week where she's walked up to reporters on the tarmac saying, "What you got?" And answered questions from them.
And all the questions are about Donald Trump.
Yeah, I know. But having a sit down with the New York fucking Times is completely unnecessary, especially when she's only got, 3 months left, if that.
Well,
before the
especially
election.
Some of the people who are bitching the loudest about her not doing more pressers and more news press releases and more press conferences and interviews are the same people who spent the last 9 years shrieking that it's all fake news. It's all fake news.
Yeah.
Well, if it's fake news, what does it matter what she does?
Right.
Asshole.
Right.
I'm sorry.
Right.
I interrupted.
That's all right. And the second thing is, this is something I came up with this week. Whenever Donald Trump decides to do some fake grab of media attention with a press conference, I'm going to have a press conference tomorrow at 2:00. Thank you. Or I'll be doing an interview with Elon Musk on Twitter. I'm back on Twitter, 8 p.m. Thank you. Put that on social media and say, is he dropping out?
Yeah.
Some big
Sounds like
announcement is coming. Is he dropping out?
Wow.
Maybe he's dropping out. He really should consider dropping out. I think he should drop out. What do you think, Drip Glass? You think he should drop out?
He seems impaired and he can't talk. I think that he has to drop out. He's very old. I understand
He's
very,
talking
very
about
old.
moving to Venezuela. Maybe he's going to drop out.
Yeah, Sharks and Batteries sounds like a man who should drop out of the race. Maybe he should listen to his, his political advisors, all the people on the right who are telling him to drop out. That's maybe he should listen to them.
Many people say he should drop out.
Many people come up to me on the street all the time and say, "Sir, is there any way you can use your influence to get Donald Trump to drop out of the race?"
It would be for the good of himself and the country.
Right.
We've got a lot more to talk about that we'll talk about on Thursday, and we hope you'll listen then.
Yeah. Thank you for listening. Please support the show. Let us not end this show without telling people that you need to support the show at proleftpod.com. There's a Patreon over there. Go ahead and click on it. Dump all your money in there, and all your problems will go away. It's miraculous how that'll work.
Hey, Drew Glass, how are the Internet Kitties doing today?
Well, Blue Gal, the Internet Kitties are still very impressed by this young Tim Walz kid.
Let's think about living. Think about living. Let's think about loving. Think about loving. Let's think about the hooping and the hopping and the popping and the lovey-dovey. Let's forget about the wine and the crying, the shooting and the dying, and the fellow with a switchblade knife. Let's think about living. Let's think about life.
The Professional Left podcast is recorded under a Creative Commons license. Copyright 2024-25, GGBG Productions.